Pathway of Faith Ministries podcast. We're changing up this evening. Our new theme is concerned with our worthiness. I am worthy not because of who I am, but whose I am. I'm worthy not because of who I am, but whose I am. And we look at our present times during these hard times, especially this past year. And there's been a lot of turmoil and hard times and things that have happened that make people feel like they're less than what they really are. The gap in pay scales, for instance, the inability to support a family through no fault of our own. Some people find themselves out of a job, they've lost their home, their families living in a car, in some cases, even living on the side of a street someplace through no fault of their own. And this is a big blow to your self esteem when such a thing as that happens. We find that more people committing suicide and doing injury to themselves, uh, committing desperate acts, and so forth. Uh, we know that there is a big gap between the haves and the has not, it seems, right now in this country, maybe in the world. And the changing laws that we have that doesn't affect finances at all, but is a very stimulant circumstance to people, and the rhetoric that goes along with these changing laws when they affect our social life. Uh, we live, put it simply, we live in trying times. We have police problems that prop up all the time and make people feel that they're valueless. Um, and then we have, even in our schools, we have fear for our children, and these school shootings that take place put us on edge. And this is things that we have to consider that make some people feel that they're not very much value. Assigning blame for social problems, some people are come under more fire when there are social problems, and people point to a certain segment of our population and say, well, it's their fault. Um, uh, just to name a few origins of inferiority feelings and of make people feel they're smaller than they actually are. So we want to talk about that a little bit this evening. And to kind of set the stage for that, and I remind you again, we're talking about I'm worthy not because who I am, but because of whose I am. So our value then is not hinging on how much money I have. It's not contingent upon how talented that I am, or the fact that I haven't achieved much in society, according to society. And in society's eyes, they might not feel too much about what I feel is a great accomplishment. Uh, we we have to consider that people look at education and job positions and those things. If we're an athlete, they get big kudos for being an athlete. If you're a superior athlete, a well-known elite, then right away you're lauded and thought highly of. But next to one of the great stars, most any of us will feel somewhat being towered over, feared being translated abroad over the face of the whole earth. We were all at one and all spoke the same language. We were, if we look at the Tower of Babel, is a good starting point to look at worthiness. We want to look at who we are as an individual. The person who has the least amount of income in this country over against the one who has the most. When we look at the Tower of Babel, now the whole earth at one time spoke the same language. They thought pretty much the same. Everybody thought pretty much the same. And then the language was all the same. Everybody spoke the same language. There wasn't any French or German or Italian speaking people. They were all speaking one language. And they began to build a tower. And they called it became known as the Tower of Babel. And what they did, they were building a tower to heaven. And the idea was if they built the tower to heaven, there would be nothing that could be denied them. So now they're going to build a tower to heaven. And they all spoke the same language. They obviously were in agreement with one another. They saw eye to eye with one another. And so they started to build this tower. So God came down and took a look and see just what was going on, what they were building. And he decided that indeed they could complete the task of building a tower into heaven. And indeed, if they were able to do that, they wouldn't be able to call the shots on their own. And they would be able to do what they wanted to do. So they started building, and the impetus for their building was they were afraid that they'd be scattered abroad over the face of the earth before they got it done, and they wanted to get it done as soon as possible. So God came down and he said, yes, they will be able to do this. And so he scattered them abroad, and he confused their language so they couldn't communicate anymore. And so now we all were the same, speaking the same language. And then we were scattered over the face of the world. And so we have Jewish-speaking people, Italian-speaking people, French, and English-speaking people. You go down to South America, you have Spanish and so forth. But we all were the same people. If you look at the metaphor, a minute ago, we all were the same. But God changed that like that. He's confused the languages and scattered us about because we were up to some mischief. And so he did this. The point being is that we're all the same. There's no better than one another. We have taken on different habits, largely based on the environment that we found ourselves in. Can you imagine? I'm in Babel one minute and I'm in Alaska the next minute. There's going to have to be some changes that take place in the way I do things, in the way I think, and in my clothing and so forth. And so, aside from that, uh, and our cultures that developed separate from the culture we had when we were in Babel. So the point being, the main point here is that I am not who I am because of who I am. I had really very little to do with it. Um, we had nothing to do. A good many of us had nothing to do with being born in America. Just the same as the Irishman didn't have anything to do being born in Ireland, or the Englishman being born in England, or the Jewish person being born in Israel. We were all born where God scattered us to, and we speak the language that we adopted at that time after we were separated. I suppose, I'm just supposing, that for a while we spoke the same language at our new place, but it says that he confused the language. So I suppose we got a new language right away. But our customs and so forth changed out of necessity. And so we look at ourselves now and we begin to think that somebody else is better than us. Well, see how ridiculous that is? That's utterly ridiculous. We're the same people. God made us the way we are. We didn't have anything to do with it. We might have adapted to the weather. Well, we hopefully did, or we would have perished. So, if you're in a hot climate, you had to adapt to being in that climate. And then, as you were in a place like Iceland, you had to adapt to that, and you had to adapt to living in a frigid climate. So, but that didn't make you different. It made you adapt different ways of survival, and you had to adapt to your environment, the different occupations that you would pursue, and that has been demonstrated through time about the movements of population depending on the climate and so forth. And climates that were maybe more agricultural, they didn't develop machinery and innovations to the extent that other climates did that were not agricultural, but you take the difference between the South and the North. The North is more industrial, and so they got the train systems and factories and so forth grew up much faster in the North than they did in the South. In the South, they were much at growing things because of the climate. They could grow all year round practically in some places. And so we look at this whole thing about who I am. If we look at it realistically, we will find that we're pretty much the same people. And we had little or nothing to do with who we are. We had a lot of breaks. Some people, when they were born and they got to be of age, their parents give them $100 million to get started. Well, that doesn't happen in every family. I know it didn't happen in my family, and I'm not sorry it didn't, because uh, getting $100 million sounds really great, but I'm sure it has many problems. Many problems concerning self-esteem. I should do a lot better since I had such a great start. I might just as well go into depression with a real good start as I would have starting out with nothing. And actually, starting out with nothing is not such a bad thing if you have your health and a high school education. Um, and in the early years in this country, sixth grade was pretty good. And and look what happened. Up until the turn of the century, um, the 1900s, people were doing pretty good, and uh, they had a lot of innovations and making a lot of progress with little education. Of course, more education they got, the better they did. And so, of course, we want education for our children, for ourselves, and we want these things. But sometimes it's going to be harder for some than it is others through no fault of our own. It's going to be harder. It's just the way things are. So, but we find in our society most of those hurdles, well, a good many of them have been tempered down. So there's more people that get a chance, but there's still a good many who have to really fight their way. And if you make a few mistakes, it gets even harder to overcome them. But just because you make a few mistakes doesn't make you a bad guy, doesn't make you a failure, doesn't make you any less a person than the next guy, because most of us have made mistakes and we're trying to overcome them. Some people have overcome them, some people are yet to overcome it. Now, the last thing I would say, that we have to remember that we are finite people. That is, we only can see today. All we can see is today. And before we do anything drastic, uh, like suicide or some other horrible thing that cannot be repaired, we need to think that today is only today. It's not the rest of our lives. It's not everything. God, who made this earth, he sees tomorrow. There was a program on TV that, forget the fellow's name right off, but he used to come on and he would tell a story. And then later on, it used to be on the radio, way before we had TV, or everybody had a TV. Of course, now we all have TVs, maybe a couple, or those who don't have the internet. At any rate, this fellow came back on after a while and said, now he told the rest of the story. And the rest of the story was usually way out there, far from where he had left us before. And it's the same idea that we don't know the rest of the story today. So don't make any earth shaking decisions until you know the rest of the story. Thank God that we have a God who knows the rest of the story. And God has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. If I keep my faith in God, then I have his promise that he's going to help me into tomorrow. He sees my tomorrow. He sees every day of my life, and he has prepared for it. When I say that I thank God for his grace and for his faith in accepting him, I'm actually saying that grace is God has prepared grace for me for every day of my life. He has prepared a way for me to meet whatever I'm going to whatever I'm going to encounter. He is going to see me through by his grace. His grace is sufficient for me. Amen. Amen. Our time is up, and I've enjoyed being with you again. But before I go, and before you go, I would like you to know that we'll be on every Thursday and at 6 o'clock, and we will start showing programs in the week, through the week, and they will be announced. What do they say? To be announced. And so they will be announced. Now, our website is pathwayoffaithministries.org. pathwayofministries.org. And please feel free to donate to this ministry. You can do it through PayPal at our website, through PayPal. You can do it by mail, Pathway of Faith Ministries, Post Office Box 12182, 12182, Omaha, Nebraska 68112. And so we'd appreciate if you take a moment and write those numbers down. You can use your credit card or debit card, and we'd be more than happy if you did. God bless you. Have a great evening. We love you, and we enjoy serving God for you. Amen. God bless.